Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Alternative Outcome Development and Data Collection Strategies, Most Significant Change and Photovoice. We are really glad to have you here today. In particular, I'm very excited to have Eugenia Gusev here with us today. Eugenia works as a technical advisor for food security and agriculture programs for the International Rescue Committee. She designs and implements programs that focus on refugee food security and agriculture in the US. And she also focuses on developing staff capacity on monitoring and evaluation methods, specifically around common metrics and participatory evaluation. Eugenia has worked with the IRC for 10 years, and she speaks French and Russian fluently and is conversational in Spanish. She also holds an MA in International Public Management from Sciences Po University in Paris, France, and a BA in International Affairs from the George Washington University Elliott School of International Affairs. My name is Jan Perez, and I will be the host for today's webinar. I am a food systems researcher and education specialist focusing on program evaluation at the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems, housed at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I'm also the lead for the GREW project, which I'll describe shortly. And my role today will be to briefly provide some context for Eugenia's presentation and field some questions for her, as well as provide some follow-up at the end. Before we begin, we have just a few housekeeping items to review. By now, hopefully all of you can hear us. If you do have any technical difficulties, please contact Vanessa Ackerman. She is with us as well today, and you can contact her through the chat box, or you can email her directly. Her email is listed here. It's also in the emails you've received from us when you registered. And as a reminder, everyone has been placed on mute to reduce background noise, so please do keep yourself on mute. So we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. However, do feel free to ask questions in the chat box throughout the session. If you don't see the chat feature, you can get there through the program toolbar, which is usually black, and it can hide at the top or bottom of the Zoom window, and you can just hover over those regions to find it. Or you can use the primary toolbar on your computer operating system. Also, please note that we are recording this webinar and it will be placed on our website shortly, and we'll send out a link to everyone who's registered as soon as it's up. So before diving into Eugenia's presentation, I want to share a bit about the GREW project, what we're doing, and how this presentation fits within that larger effort. So the GREW project, which stands for Gaining Results Through Evaluation Work, is an educational enhancement team project funded by the USDA's Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program. The purpose of the project is to help organizations who train beginning farmers and ranchers to do more and better evaluation. And basically, it's a capacity building project. The desired outcomes are, as a result of the project, we hope that organization staff find evaluation way more accessible to do, more efficient and useful, and that organizations will be better able to document the results and improve their programming. This project involves developing resources such as our online evaluation library and an outcomes list and some diagrams on developing outcomes, which you can find on our website. We also have a learning community, which is intended to be a place to talk with peers and evaluators to explore evaluation issues and best practices. And of course, we're doing webinars. So we're using webinars to do two main things. The first is to really provide an overview of basics of evaluation and to just give a taste of what's out there and what's possible, and to connect you with useful resources, because there are tons and tons and tons of resources out there, so we don't want to duplicate that. What we do want to give you really specific information on is examples from other beginning farmer and rancher programs. So in some of our webinars, we'll be looking at what these different things look like in practice, how it was useful, what kind of resources are used and needed. And today, we will be doing both of those things when Eugenia talks about the most significant change and Photovoice approaches. So a little more context. I just wanted to mention that both the most significant change, or MSC, and Photovoice are often considered approaches. And here, approaches refer to an integrated packet of options that include different kinds of methods or processes, and that they've often been developed to address specific evaluation questions or challenges. And you can see a lot of different types of approaches here you might be familiar with. Now, we've chosen to focus on these two approaches today for a few reasons. First is that they provide an alternative to how outcomes are normally identified, and our last webinar was on kind of a much more traditional way of looking at outcomes from a program perspective, and this really looks at outcomes from a participant perspective. And the second thing we're trying to do is attend to a lot of the feedback we've had about what people would like to see us do. So we've been asked for more information on participatory approaches, doing qualitative methods, and things that can be useful for non-English speakers. So with that, I will turn this over to Eugenia.
Great. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm also really excited to be with all of you today to share our recent experience with using most significant change and Photovoice, which hopefully will be useful for everybody. The agenda for today for me would be to give you a brief overview of what IRC New Routes is all about first, before launching into an overview of both of the methodologies and some of the preliminary results from those evaluations. And then at the end, we'll have some Q&A opportunity. However, if you do feel the need to type into chat because you can't hear, or there's something that I didn't explain very well, please feel free to type your question into the chat, and we'll pick that up as I go. So first, to define participatory monitoring and evaluation, I needed two definitions for myself to really try to explain what this is all about, and the value of embarking on this journey of engaging with participatory methods. The first definition, I think, is really great because it shows to you that you can take baby steps to move into the participatory direction, right? So I think it is a very approachable thing to change the way that you are evaluating and the way that you're studying whether your program is achieving what it's meant to achieve. The second definition is something that we can maybe strive towards, more blue sky thinking, and it's a little bit more radical in that you want to be moving towards a direction where your evaluation will be a lot more participant driven from the start to the end. And there are advantages and some disadvantages, just like with any evaluation method, with participatory monitoring and evaluation. But I think the biggest advantage with participatory evaluation is that it is a collaborative process, which helps to build staff and participant capacity, and it helps to build ownership of the project, which in turn really enhances your program outcomes. On the downside, that may require more time and commitment from both sides of the equation, from staff and also from clients. So just keeping that in mind. So a little bit about New Routes and what we do. New Routes is part of the International Rescue Committee, and IRC is a global organization that was started at the end of World War II at the behest of Albert Einstein. In the US, we're known as a refugee resettlement agency, but for the past 15 years, part of that resettlement work has also included food and farming programs for refugees and for immigrant communities. Some of the outcomes that we're seeking are healthier communities, improved livelihoods, and resilient local food systems. So this is an example project. This is the actual project where we had an opportunity to use a participatory evaluation method. This is a log frame, a basic one, and I wanted to show it to you to demonstrate what type of project, as an example of what type of project would be a good project to use a participatory evaluation with. Now, just to make sure that you're all paying attention, I'm going to ask you to actually use your chat right now to let us know what you think would be some useful things that you would want to measure for this type of project to figure out whether you're achieving your objectives. If you can take the chance now to type into your chat boxes to let us know what types of things would you be looking to measure. So we're going to take a look at that. see, I'm seeing some path already appearing. So somebody is saying skills development, change in food access and health resources, emergent leaders, perceived safety in gardens, how people are engaging with educators. Fantastic. What kind of skills, if they feel safer, trusting, welcome, social connections, engagement of marginalized communities and their perceived success. Let's do maybe one more. People contributing their experiences. Great. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that you could be measuring there. And this project, we have the overall goal of improving community and family support systems for a particular population, and also this leadership component, right? And underneath that, you have different bits and pieces that we were striving towards. There's even an objective for staff. This was a project that was focused across 3 different offices. We worked in Oakland, Tucson, and New York. And they had population differences. Our Oakland office was primarily a youth-facing program. Our New York office had a job readiness component as well as the garden and farm. And they all had in common the garden and farm as kind of the foundation of the program was gardening and farming. And then they had these different layers to them, as well as an overall overarching leadership component. So we were seeking for a way to be able to gain insight into some of these hard to measure elements that this, like leadership development or feeling safe. And for some of these elements, there are these long tools out there that are evidence-based but not necessarily tested for the type of population that we were working with. And obviously, always we have constraints of time and money. So we were trying to find an effective way of going beyond the typical survey. And my slide is stuck. And trying to get to a place where we can speak about the more complex elements. So we wanted to learn who is impacted by our program and how can the program grow and change based on participant feedback, and how can we build a 360 feedback loop or dialogue with our clients. And that was really essential to us. And also just to underline that we weren't going to abandon ship in terms of, oh, we're going to throw all these other tools out. We're not going to count how many people are coming to our workshops. We're not going to do workshop surveys. That's absolutely not the point, right? We wanted to complete the picture. We wanted to get a more full scope of feedback from clients and do it in a more meaningful way for them and not just extract information from them. And once we have those results, we wanted to be able to compare and contrast with the other tools that we were using to see if we're contradicting ourselves, to see if things are confirming themselves, right? And so we were seeking an alternative way to do this. And so we had organizational experience with the most significant change approach. We had some experience in international programs. I had done a version of this in Ivory Coast a few years prior to this. And we decided to give it a try. And a little bit about MSC. So most significant change technique was developed by development consultants Rick Davis and Jessica Dart. They've developed a really great free resources online. So if you search for most significant change, you'll probably stumble onto YouTube videos and their free manual. They started, I believe, in India or Bangladesh at the time, and they've kind of evolved it over time. And since then, it's been really taken up a lot internationally, not so much on the US side, even though it's absolutely applicable to any population anywhere. And so it was really tested with non-English speaking populations, a lot with non-literary populations. So it has that flexibility of being used in that way. It's participatory because many project stakeholders are involved both in deciding the sorts of change to be recorded and in analyzing the data. And notice that I'm talking about change. So measuring change or perceived change is what it's all about. It is a form of monitoring because it occurs throughout the program cycle and provides information to help people manage the program. So some organizations liked it so much that they do it over and over again to test how their program is evolving. Others do it more kind of at the end of a project cycle, just as a one-off, as an evaluation to be able to take stock of what's happened. It is a great way to identify those unexpected changes, right? So rather than have a survey that asks very specific things about specific program elements, this requires you to really step back and out of your project and then ask your participant, well, what did you think? What was your experience about? There is an interesting element to it that I'll go into in a few slides that basically forces the staff at various levels of the organization to test their assumptions and values about what the project is about and what the project is achieving versus what it should be achieving. And it sounds a little bit nebulous now, but I promise you this, for us, it was really monumental. It was a really important element that is an integral part of this methodology. I already explained how it's participatory, and I think there's different ways to make it more participatory than what we did the first time around. There's ways to engage with your clients, with your participants, I think, even during the data collection phase. I think it all depends on the amount of time that you have and the type of population that you're working with. So you can really think through from start to finish how you will engage with your stakeholders, how you will engage with your participants, and how you will feedback the information that you learned at the end of the process. You don't need to be a specialist, and this is really key. I think there's a lot of kind of aversion towards evaluation and monitoring, and some of it seems really complex. This methodology it's rigorous. There are very concrete steps that you should be kind of following, right, to really adhere to it to get the type of results that you would be getting with this type of methodology. It's tested, but it's really not difficult to learn, and it doesn't require a lot of time to do so. It does encourage analysis and data collection, and it builds staff capacity. So it's a great way to ease your staff into the evaluation world in a way that's interesting, in a way that can become really fascinating for them and engaging, and it really gives back. And it delivers a rich picture of the project results. Finally, it is story-based, right? So it's based on the concept that storytelling is something that is universal. It, any culture in any country has stories, and that's the way that's at the center of this methodology. Is you're essentially asking people to tell you a story. What has changed over this project period for you? Tell me about it. So the first phase is you're asking your program participants about what has happened, and you have to kind of decide for your program what is that project time period that you're focusing on. I would recommend a year. Some people do it after 6 months. A year is a significant amount of time for changes to occur. More than that would be hard for people to remember, right? But it is very important to calibrate the time. It's also important for you to frame what the project is about. As you saw the log frame earlier, there were so many activities, and some participants were involved in one type of activity, other participants were involved in numerous. And so when you're talking to your clients, you have to make sure that you frame what activity they were exactly engaged in so that they know what you're talking about. Same thing with your stakeholders. That's the first phase. You're asking them, what was the most significant change that you've experienced over the past year? That's the main question. In reality, we did find it was easier. This is both from the Congolese example and in our example here in the US. We did break up the question into 4 parts just to ease the person that we're talking into this idea of what they will be talking about, but the main question remained the same. And you collect stories. On average, people spoke between 35 minutes up to an hour. That's what you need to be expecting when you're doing this process. In the second phase, this is the value testing phase, I guess. This is the participatory analysis phase. So once you've collected all the stories, you are going to be discussing with various levels of your staff, depending on how hierarchical your organization is, how many tiers you have. You can include stakeholders in this process. You can get really creative about who's involved in this second phase. You're going to be looking at all the changes that your participants have mentioned in their stories, right? And you're going to assess which ones are the most pertinent to the project, which ones are the ones that are spoken about the most, or what are the outliers. And you're going to be testing your assumptions and your values as an organization, as staff, against those results together in one room. So for us, this is what that looked like. So we had basically two main tiers of assessment. So we had 3 locations. Each location collected 30 stories, so we had a total of 90 stories. Once the stories were collected, staff within each office sat down for almost an entire day. I came to help facilitate that conversation. Um, and they basically discussed and co-analyzed with note cards, with Sharpies, right, in one room with sticky notes, all of their 30 stories in that one room. And they determined together what were the main domains of change. So the main changes that they have found to be the most meaningful in those stories and why. And it's a really interesting process because you have to think about, oh, well, what are the criteria and how do I decide what's most meaningful? You know, is it the change that's been mentioned the most? Is it the story that's written the most, you know, in the most beautiful way? Or is it this outlier of, you know, maybe just a couple people speaking to this element, but it's so important and we have to leave it as part of the most significant changes that we want to pass on to the next level of the organization. So from there, we received 15 stories which were sent to HQ, where we had more senior staff. So these are staff that were much more removed from the actual day-to-day activities that were happening. They knew about new routes and they roughly knew about, you know, this project that we had, but they don't engage with this content on a day-to-day basis. So they were actually really excited. I was really nervous about this. You know, is the vice president really going to want to do this? And is the senior director of this and that really going to show up? And they did. They really showed up and they spent half a day locked in a room with note cards and Sharpies, and they were super excited to read these 15 stories. And they in turn also came up with the main changes and the domains of change. And they then selected 3 finalist stories, one for each of the locations where we were. And then this information got fed back to the staff and to the clients and to the key stakeholders that participated. So we, from all of the information that was collected, we did a data analysis from all the stories. We annotated and kind of recorded the process that occurred with with these discussions around domain of change. And we produced a really long report. We produced a fact sheet. The short of the long is that these were the main domains of change that we found for this particular project. Over 90% of our participants said that our food and farming projects impacted their health, they impacted their social capital, which is connections that they make with people that they know or people that are different from themselves, impacted their self-efficacy, so their ability to go out and do things for themselves. Learning and education was a surprising one. That talked a lot about people's ability to participate in workshops and to learn and to gain skills. And they felt empowered from participating in our workshops and from sharing their own skills with each other. And that was a theme that was really popular with them. And then welcoming communities. And that came a lot also from our boundary partners. But we learned a lot. Just to give you a snippet of the types of stories that we were reading and how we went about coding and deciding what went where in terms of these higher domains of change that we had to categorize into. So this is an example of social capital and mental health domain of change. This is from a New York participant. She says, this program really helped me a lot because when I first came here, it was like I was completely lost. I was uprooted. I had no one. So you end up in a country where you don't know the language, you don't have anyone, you don't know where to go. It gave me a world to live in and it gave me courage, right? And so, I mean, it was chock full of stories like this. Really, it was hard to read through them and not, you know, not get teary-eyed. And some staff did, you know, while we were reading these. Are just amazing stories of courage. And through them, as you were reading through, you had to underline where they saw the changes, right? And kind of ascribe them to a higher category. So in this case, she talks about coming out of isolation, right? Coming out of isolation, being connected to a new community, and then having courage. And then she talks more about feeling better. So mental health was a huge factor in terms of the domain of change that she was talking about. That's where you get all of your data and your from the stories, and that's how you can categorize it. So the other thing that we did that was really interesting is when we went to that second level of analysis, co-analysis with HQ, I had asked our staff who participated in this to record really short videos that I could show to them to talk about the process, to talk about their favorite quote, and to talk about whether they would want to do this process again. So I just want to play this for you. Let me just change my setting here. And I'll be quiet now, and let's just listen to what our Katrina Martinez has to say. Just 1 second.
Hello, my name is Katrina Martinez. I'm the Nutrition and Food Security Program Supervisor here in Tucson. I started with IRC as a nutrition coordinator in 2015 and I have been the program supervisor for 1 year. So I want to share my favorite quote from story number TUC011, and I'm going to jump around the answer. So this is in answer to what changes have you noticed as a result of this program. And this client said, "Before I joined this program, the only friend I could talk to was my only child. In this program, all women, we garden together and they're part of my family. We're sharing different issues and sharing vegetables. What I don't have, I request from a friend and he or she gives me, and I end up eating a variety of vegetables that I didn't have and vice versa. Out of loneliness, I meet other ladies whom we share problems and talk about them and then feel more relaxed than before. My garden has become my doctor. What I mean by becoming my doctor is that sometimes when I have many issues in my head, I volunteer and call some ladies so we can go to our garden. I go pick them up at the garden and just tend to doing some garden jobs while I need to talk and bring everything out so it feels good." And this quote is my favorite because it's reflective of the overall MSC process for me. So it showed more in depth of what the clients have, what their stake is in the program. So, I always thought, our program is geared towards food security. People can grow culturally appropriate vegetables. They can increase or supplement their food stamp allotment. But this shows that people really value the relationships, that they really value the program. So, for us, we were unsure if we should develop a new garden. We've been looking for land in Tucson for 2 years, and this really validated that the clients have a lot of value and, again, a lot of stake in the program. So we decided to move forward with this literacy garden that we're building. So the MSC was very valuable to us. It gave us a lot of really good material to engage with clients in an ongoing conversation with them. And I would absolutely do this process again, maybe in a couple of years when our program has evolved some more. Thank you.
Great. So that was another way that you can make this process more participatory is through the video content. So we're going to switch gears now, and I'm going to talk about Photovoice. I know that was a lot to take in, and I'm sure you have a lot of questions. But I'm gonna keep going if that's okay. But please do chat if there is something unresolved for you that's prohibiting you from paying attention to the rest. So we had another opportunity about a year later to conduct another participatory evaluation, and this was for a project that was in Salt Lake City, Charlottesville, Virginia, and in Baltimore, Maryland. So again, we had 3 locations. Again, complex set of objectives. We had increased nutrition, increased sense of place and agency and integration. Refugees had improved mental health and increased capacity of IRC to lead community-driven development and build power with refugee and immigrant communities. So there was a lot there. We felt a little bit braver this time around. MSC gave us a little bit of courage. We thought, you know what, we want to try a different method. So we went for Photovoice, in part because of the way that it works really well with low literacy populations as well, and it was more participatory. So the evaluation objectives were similar. So we were looking to contrast perceived impacts with intended project outcomes, to gain insight into causal links between activities and outcomes. Again, it's to gain insight. We can't really prove causal links with this type of evaluation methods, and learn how project participants experience project activities and perceive project impacts. So Photovoice is a really interesting method where the data collection actually happens through the participants. So the participants of the project become co-researchers. It is a participatory action research method, PAR, and it's often used with community advocacy efforts. It was also started kind of, apparently the mid-90s was very fruitful for participatory evaluation. It was also started around the same time as MSC by researchers Wang and Burris, who tested it with a community health promotion project in China. So essentially puts the camera in the hands of the co-researchers, who then produce images that build the context and set the focal point for discussion. There is also a research question, which I will show later, that helps to shape their data collection. And the question that they're asking about their situation, about the project, is a type of critical consciousness. And this term is really key, I think, to this concept and to this methodology. And the critical consciousness concept was coined by a Brazilian educator, Paulo Freire. So there's a lot written by him. You can read a little bit about that if you want. And then community researchers and staff work together and they are the co-creators of knowledge as a result of this entire methodology. So as I said, the first step was collection of photographs. Then the middle piece is probably the most time-consuming piece, as we've learned the hard way, and it has multiple steps. This is the image co-analysis and theme development. So you're essentially also looking for themes of change or domains of change like you would with most significant change, but you're using images instead. And there's different ways of doing it. We broke it up into roughly 3 phases. The first phase was really important because that's when you sit down one-on-one. So you have a facilitator, usually a staff member, sitting down with each of the co-researchers and all of their initial images. And usually they would come back with 25 or 30 images at the first meeting. And by the end of the meeting, they're supposed to have narrowed down the images to a given number. Let's say they went from 30 to 10, to a manageable number. And this process is where you establish understanding, where you define certain terms, where you explain what the images are all about, and you find a common language together. And all of this is recorded, so you should be recording all of this information. And then the second and the third meeting is where the co-researchers meet together as a group, and they go through a similar facilitated process where they narrow down the images and they redefine these domains of change. Again, it's a process that is very time consuming. It's super fascinating, especially when you have multiple languages in the room and multiple cultures and ways of seeing. So it's a really interesting process. And then the final piece of the puzzle is some sort of event that you do at the end, which is a key stakeholder meeting. And then that helps you plan for next steps of the project or beyond the life of the project. And usually it's some sort of gallery walk. So you are using the final images that the co-researchers selected, and you plan together for this key stakeholder meeting with them. That's fairly important. And you show those images, you have the co-researchers explain what those images are about and what they represent. And then you have a facilitated conversation with the stakeholders in the room. So that's the short version of what the process is. So some important considerations before you embark on using Photovoice. This is from our learning. Taking photos can be burdensome. You know, you have to take that into account. It's important when you first have a meeting with the co-researchers that you are recruiting, you definitely have to have a session that you dedicate to teaching them how to use whichever equipment you choose, a point and shoot camera, a throwaway camera, a phone. There's different ways to do this. You have to set some parameters, you have to demonstrate what a good image is, and co-researchers get really invested in it. They want a beautiful picture, right? So you have to be, you know, gentle with your participants. You have to give them the information that they're seeking, and then people are really engaged and really excited in the end. Planning should involve co-researchers, and this includes, you know, when, where, and how Photovoice is conducted. You might need to do a small pilot run to have them do some test images and then have them come back. When you plan for that stakeholder meeting, you make sure that you involve your co-researchers in that element as well, and so there's no surprise questions, and that they're part of the conversation, right? Not just a prop, that they are leading and are a part of that conversation. you need to effectively debrief and care for the well-being of the co-researchers, because some of those images will be really personal, deeply personal to them. That was the case also with MSC, I will say, but I might get into this a little bit later. The stories have an easier way of being anonymized, whereas the images and the way that you facilitate Photovoice towards the end, especially them representing their images and talking about them, makes them a lot more vulnerable in the process. Well, equipment, we learned that simple is better. A digital camera is great, but then you end up with hundreds of photos, right? If you use a throwaway camera, you're limited to 30 shots. And so that takes away some of the time-consuming elements that we dealt with in some instances. And it's really important to get consent statement and forms. So this is internal as well as external, right? So you want to have clear agreement with your participants about how and where the images will be used after the process is over. And then you also have to explain to your participants and give them consent forms if they want to take pictures of other people, right? That they need to get informed consent from people that they'll be taking pictures from. This is also very important if you do want to publish later on. This is, this is research where you are dealing with humans, and so you do have to make sure that there is consent involved. So the key research question was, how has your participation in the New Roots program affected your life? And I mentioned this before, this critical element when people come back with the images of decoding the images of what influences, it's really important to understand what influences the understanding of an image, right? So it can be cultural, it can be personal, it can be language. And when you're having that first one-on-one meeting, it's really critical to build that trust together and to build that understanding together. And one example from literature, background literature that I found is there was an example of a woman who went to do this project in, I think, in Nepal, and she was a white Western researcher, and she sat down with one of her co-researchers, and the image was of a boy standing outside of a building. And she focused in on the boy, right? And they were discussing the image, and the co-researcher explained that, yes, the boy is waiting, but he's waiting to get access to a bathhouse to wash himself. And the reason that this picture was significant was because there were no such places for women, right? So there was an issue for women and getting access to hygiene in his community, and that's why he took that picture, right? So really important to kind of cast away assumptions and to find a common language when you're decoding these images together with your co-researchers. Project impacts, we're still working on some of the evaluation data, but essentially there were a lot. People spoke a lot about community places that connect, access to familiar and healthy food, saving and earning money were a big piece of what people spoke about. There were a lot of pictures of stuffed freezers full of food, right? So that was one, that's how we kind of came up with that they came up with this theme of saving and earning money. Improved mental health, access to physical exercise, opportunity to share food, skills, and knowledge, and a sense of accomplishment, dignity, and satisfaction. So based on these results, one primary lesson from this evaluation is that IRC's New Roots program does not only provide access to food and agricultural opportunity, but it also provides participants with tools to establish a level of independence, build skills and confidence, and nurtures community and a sense of home. All of this facilitating the transition of refugees into a new country. The process itself was a huge learning curve, and we learned so much from it. It helped us to better understand participant values. For example, for money-making purposes, but how it brings them closer to home. The process built a lot of relationships and understanding among co-researchers, and we had mixed groups, so that was really great, that people were really coming together across, language barriers. It brought out co-researcher skills and expertise. It helped co-researchers to see the value that they are bringing to their communities, promoted new skills and self-efficacy among co-researchers. It fostered increased understanding and ownership of the program, and educated the wider community about the program itself. Some conclusions, data analysis. So you can do a lot or you can do a little, but there's definitely a lot of content to deal with. Both MSC and Photovoice provide you with really rich content. So MSC is the stories that you have that you can analyze. And then Photovoice has the images and the layered kind of facilitation notes that you have from all of the discussion around the domains of change. So in our case, you know, for MSC, I did a lot of the secondary analysis, extracting some of the information from the stories. Given how many stories I had 90. I did end up using some software that's very low cost. It's hard to do this on note cards. If you have a small sample, maybe you can get away with just using note cards to do this. There's different ways to analyze this. You can look across gender and compare the responses, across types of activities that people are involved in, by ethnicity, by location. You can make visual word maps. So for example, when we were trying to figure out our domains of change, this image on the left here is the type of kind of word tree that we built out to look at the different themes and how they relate, right? So if you look from the right to the left, you have community and family connections, new friendships, sharing, accessing different cultures through food and farming, right? So then we thought about, okay, well, what does this represent? Okay, well, the first three, they feed it into this concept of bonding. So connecting with people that are like yourself. And then the bottom one connects more to bridging, so connecting to people that are different from yourself. And that feeds into social capital, right? So they don't always fit, they didn't always fit so neatly into these categories, and some of them intersect and overlapped, but that was one way to visualize what people were saying and those relationships between the domains of change. Then you can do a word cloud. This is the image on the bottom right, where you, again, this is something you can do for free online. You run your text through this app and it spits out what words were the most prominent. You take out things like the and right? And here you've got saving money. So several people talked about saving money, and that was the theme that kept repeating. There's many different things you can do. You just need to make sure that you plan for it and that you set your expectations from the start about what you will do with the data. In terms of cost, Photovoice was a bit more expensive and more expensive than we initially thought. It was, again, as I mentioned, the kind of interpretation time and the facilitation time took longer than we anticipated. Our staff were super diligent and really didn't want to miss any bits and pieces. So they really went through all the images in a very ordered way and recorded everything. And we got an amazing amount of data, but that took a lot of time. So again, you have to think about the scale. We had 8 community researchers per location, and it cost, including staff time, interpretation, transport, incentives, and then equipment, roughly $9,000. So that doesn't include technical advisor time. I mean, my colleagues supported both of these evaluations with staff training, ad hoc support, providing templates and guidance, and some of the facilitation as well. MSC was a little bit cheaper and a little bit, yeah, it cost a bit less. And we had 30 people interviewed per location. So this is the cost per location for both of these things. So these are the categories that you should be planning for if you would like to budget for an evaluation of this sort. Were they participatory? Definitely. They were participatory in different ways. The data instrument was, I put research-centered or client-centered, and I mean, you know, was it just extractive or was it really giving a voice to the client? Both of these methodologies, I would argue, were client-centered. They really provide an avenue for participants to talk about things that they normally aren't asked, right? Normally we don't give them so much free space to talk about everything that they would like to tell us. So they're both fantastic for that. The data collection, Photovoice was a lot more participatory in that way, and that the clients became the co-researchers, whereas the MSC data collection was done by staff. Data analysis at the first level was collective for MSC with staff, and then for Photovoice in our case, it was the co-researchers and then facilitated by staff. Second tier of analysis was done by the technical unit, And then the stakeholder meeting, we involve stakeholders, staff, and clients. Planning for next steps. Again, it's a critical step. You have to plan for this element. So after the key stakeholder meeting, what happens? What are you going to do with all this information? How are you going to feed it back into your decision making? Plan for it in advance. I think we learned our lesson a little bit the first time around. We didn't know quite how to go about it. We still did it, but I think we can do much more with it in the future. So to wrap this up, both of these methodologies did not disappoint. They were really powerful ways to hear our participants and what they think about the projects. It was a great way to build staff capacity. We got a lot of amazing data. It was empowering to participants and staff. And we successfully explored the effects of complex program elements. And then lessons learned is that good facilitation is key for good results for both of these methods. Interpretation and facilitation is very time consuming. Establish from the start that your plan, of how you're going to be using the data, what you're going to be doing, where you're going to be hosting your stakeholder meeting, and also develop your consent forms and explore IRB. Finally, there's also a chance to use all of this information for media and advocacy. And in the case of Photovoice, we had actually a lot of local news coverage in all 3 locations. And then we also, our Charlottesville office was accepted to present at the World Refugee Forum, which takes place every year in Geneva, Switzerland. So our manager there went up to Geneva this December and presented about the stories and the photographs there, which was amazing. And MSC, we actually sent a brief report to a few journalists, and Now This World, which has a YouTube channel, picked it up, and they did a 6-minute feature, which is pretty long for them. They usually do 2-minute features, and they quoted the report. And they did an amazing YouTube video about our Bronx farm. So there's a lot that you can do with the content that comes out of it. So here are some resources. In vivo, deduce, and alt saturate are all tools that you can use to do qualitative theme analysis with your stories. And Vivo, I believe, also allows you to code and analyze your images. Deduce is very approachable. It costs about $20 a month, and Vivo is like $500 for a year, and alt saturate is free. And more additional reading is the MSC manual from Rick Davis and Jessica Dart, and the Photovoice manual. That's it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Eugenia. We have a couple questions, but first I'm just going to do a very, very, very brief review, if I can get this to work. So yeah, before we take more questions, I just wanted to reiterate for those of you working on your BFRDP RFA proposal, a useful definition of participatory for that could also be what's listed here. This is one of the same ones that Eugenia listed before. And I just wanted to kind of remind folks that the participatory focus that's so integrated in MSC and Photovoice is one way of doing it, and you can also do it in a slightly more simple manner if need to, as Eugenia mentioned, that you can work up to like levels of participation. And let's see. This just provides a really brief overview of how you can do that. The who you can include could be any and all of those groups. What kind of parts of the evaluation, where you might include people. When is, you can get feedback from folks, advisory team meetings, on draft reports, instrument testing. And there's a couple example questions you can ask when you do get together with your folks about how to help include them in the evaluation. Main thing I wanted to show, at least regarding participatory methods, the top link is has a nice kind of background, and it of course, as all terms, people use them differently, and so it covers a number of kind of ways of looking at it in the top link, but it can be a nice overview. I'll let you guys look at the slides. We'll be sending them out to take a look at these other resources. And now we will take some questions. So there's two that came in earlier. One was, I just wanted to confirm, Eugenia, and Photovoice, that the participants are also the co-researchers, right?
That is correct. Yes, Photovoice recruits participants to be co-researchers.
Great. And did you pay people?
Yes, in both instances, we determined a fair amount for compensation for time, and it also included transport compensation.
Great. All right. Is there any other questions out there? It looks like we had a desire to see the links that you had in the slides. And again, we will be sending those slides out. Yeah, do you
Yes,
want to?
I will have to, I'll have to take a look because they were calibrated kind of according to IRC standard, but I can certainly share some templates. Let's figure out the best way to do that after
Great.
the webinar's
Yeah,
over.
yeah, we'll be sending out an email linking to the slides and the recording. Once we have that online, hopefully we'll send that out tomorrow so we can send links or examples along with that.
There's a question from Abigail. Can you give some examples of how to plan for integrating this information back into your work plan? Absolutely. I think a lot of what you'll learn, and you'll get suggestions from people too. They might say, you know, there's some negative things that might come through the evaluation as well, some suggestions. MSC is a more positively biased methodology, but we still got some negative feedback through not extremely negative, but some things to improve for sure, or some desires. And so the best way really is you're going to be going through your findings, and you want to look back to the participants and feed it back to them. And if there are ways to plan with them for your next iteration of activities, um, you know, it depends on how your funding works, but if you have flexibility to adjust course, right? Or for example, people are saying, oh, I don't have enough land. I would like to farm larger pieces of land. You know, if you're able to respond directly to comments like that and to, you know, to take appropriate actions, that's the way that you would be kind of integrating that in your next to-do steps. All of this information is super useful also to writing into future proposals. So you will tell your donor, you know, from this evaluation, we learned that, you know, it's our program around farming is effective in increasing people's incomes. People on average, you know, and then you might basically look side by side your MSC evaluation or your Photovoice evaluation results, right? Talking about income and savings. And then on the side, maybe you were recording what people are making, right? Or maybe their sales you're recording, or their receipts, whatever way you're capturing that information. So now you have two ways of, you know, confirming that information that you can pitch to the donor and say, look, we have done the assessment, we have done the legwork, we know this works. Please fund us to do more of this stuff that we're doing, right? So there's great ways to integrate that into future proposals and to kind of correct course for your current project, depending on what the feedback is. So from Cara Fravor, what is the best way to reference this research in a BFRDP application? Is the official name of the BFRDP funded project? So these two projects were not funded by BFRDP, but BFRDP is interested in participatory evaluation research. So it sounds like you can absolutely pursue these types of methodologies within BFRDP. We currently have not published these particular studies yet externally. But there are other studies out there that, so you can cite other studies that use participatory methodologies that might fit with the type of project that you're trying to fund. As soon as we publish, I will let everybody know, but that's still on the burner. Do you want the official name of the group project?
That was me just
Okay,
checking in
sorry.
on whether citing your project or the group project. I wasn't quite sure. You know, I got really curious when you were talking, Eugenia, about the costs, and I was wondering if that also included kind of the time for both like the analysis and report writing. I know often somehow report writing falls off my budget. So I was curious about that.
The amount of time it takes to
Yeah,
do.
if that's the staff time for that is included in your summary cost.
So for Photovoice, yes, I would say so. For MSC, because that second tier of the, so I basically took on the 90 story analysis
Mm-hmm.
process, and what was really helpful is the co-analysis that was done prior in each location. They helped me build that thematic tree. That was a huge help and time saver. But then I was coding using Deduce for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So that was time consuming. So I think if you, depending on how big, I mean, you don't have to collect 90 stories, right? You can do a sample of your project, a representative sample, um, and it'll be a lot more manageable for you. If you feel like you're going to be doing more than 30 stories and you have a really small team, consider writing into your proposal some consultant time and try, or partner up with a university PhD student, or um, you can find ways to kind of partner with a research institution that might be low cost. You have to compare and have those discussions with your potential partners and a university researcher versus an independent consultant, pros and cons for both, and analyze the cost that would basically engender. But yes, if you're going to be having 90 stories, it's helpful to have additional support, and it is a bit time consuming and doesn't really cost.
Great. We have another question here. Can you tell us more about how your incentives work? This is your budget included incentives for participants, co-researchers, and yeah, how did that
Right.
work?
So we would count, basically, you would want to consider the time of transport to the meetings, how many meetings you're going to be holding, and the length of the meetings, and basically find, you know, an hourly amount that is satisfactory, that you feel like would bring people to the table. And again, I didn't fill that out in terms of numbers because it looked different in every location, depending on, what the living wage was roughly, and the kind of expectations, that precedents that we've set in terms of compensating clients. There are different ways. For MSC, I know we paid people with bus passes and some gift cards because it was a more condensed process, right? We really were involving them only once, and they had to just travel to and from. There's barely any follow-up. For Photovoice, they're much more committed and they spend a lot more time. So you probably would want to pay them in installments, an amount that would be fair, compensating them for their time.
Great, thank you. Well, we are just about out of time, so I would just like to say thank you so much, Eugenia. This was really, really great. I hope you all have found this really useful as well. So I'd love to ask you to take a moment or two to fill out our survey so we can get some feedback on the presentation. In particular in there, we have some questions to get at what you want to see next. So we'd love to get that as well as feedback on today. And there's a link in the chat box for you. Additionally, we'll be sending you an email with the link shortly, pretty much right after we end. And I just wanted to let you all know that we'll have some upcoming sessions. We're still definitely in the planning process. What it looks like at the moment is that we have 2 learning communities coming up, and that's where we can all talk together, see each other in Zoom, break out into smaller groups and have discussion about what's working and how we might do things better and how we're addressing problems. And at the moment, we're looking at one session on farmer and rancher outcome issues, and the next on the long-term system level outcomes. And then we'll hop into, after that, tracking outcomes over time. That's probably one of the most desired topics from our needs assessment and then from the ongoing surveys we've had. So we'll do both a webinar and learning community on that. And if you want more information about the project, there's some links here online. And again, you'll get these slides shortly, but you can also Google our website. UCSC GRU project will get you there. And you'll find the link there as well to get on our listserv to hear about these upcoming sessions. So let's see. Yes, we're at 1:01 Pacific time. So thank you so much, everybody. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.